Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you back to another edition of Foreclosurepedia Podcast. Foreclosurepedia Podcast, presentation of the Foreclosurepedia Radio Network, which premieres each Sunday evening at 2100 hours. This is going to be a simulcast this evening with Terry Platt, who will be conducting an interview with me. I'm Paul Williams, editor-in-chief of Foreclosurepedia, and Terry Platt owns and operates Cubic Yard. She actually still works within the industry, and here recently, about 4 weeks ago, I stepped out of the property preservation industry. I still do rehabs and such, but I originally hail from California. I was born in San Francisco, grew up on the left coast for quite a while. My childhood is rather boring. I mean, other than the fact I went to private parochial school all my life, and I suppose that's strange, excuse me, because I'm an agnostic. That doesn't mean that I absolutely don't believe in God. It just means that I haven't seen anything that per se moves me in that direction. So I'm open-minded. I just, move on from there. But long story short, I graduated a year early at 17. I enlisted in the United States Navy. When I took the ASVAB, which is an entrance exam, apparently most of it was off the charts, and they said, "Hey, we have a couple opportunities we'd like you to look at and retest in," and so that opened the doors into the intelligence community. I'm not per se at liberty to say precisely what agencies I worked for. I just worked. I was still active duty Navy, but I was attached to civilian agencies. So I went, had pulled a hitch down in Panama, Operation Just Cause. Got out and didn't have a whole lot going on for me when I came home domestically, but I realized I needed a trade. And at that point in time, construction was a pretty good trade. Excuse me. So I worked with the Carpenters Union and worked my way up the ranks, became a master carpenter. Worked on a lot of sites, both here in the United States and over in Australia and Europe. About 8 to 9 years ago, I came out here into what's known as the Blue Ridge area, or the Appalachians, and that's where I met with my fiance, Crystal Mills. Her family had been doing property preservation work for quite some time, and so it felt like a pretty good niche. And so I began to, we hit it off great. And over a period of time, over a couple of years, we ended up having a son. I have a great son, Darius Paul. And so that brings us up to probably about 2.5 years ago. And 2.5 years ago, I had a problem. Excuse me, and that problem was that I had done some work, Foreclosurepedia, the company, had done some work, and the individuals didn't want to pay us. And those individuals I'd reported upon in the past, and that was really what started Foreclosurepedia.org. I was having difficulties getting any pay from them. That was Jason Mathis and Brandon Lambert. And within the intelligence communities, there's a lot of tactics that governments use, and I'm sure many people are well aware of this. As you watch the news today with the National Security Agency and tapping the phones and bringing pressure on folks like, Chancellor Merkel over in Germany. I mean, the reality is that when you bring pressure upon individuals and you bring that pressure upon them publicly, they're going to do what you want. Now, a lot of people like to blur the lines between ethical and legal, and you just can't do that. And that goes fundamentally to a phrase I use: it's business, it's not personal. So long story short, we had our checks cut. We had our checks cut and overnighted to us. And I came to the conclusion that, if I'm one individual and I'm not getting paid, and these... Incidentally, Mathis and Lambert were both not only felons, but wanted felons. Then, and I examined their portfolio, and I said, these people are working on United States government contracts. I thought, this thing has to be fairly large. So I went ahead and bought a website, and I thought, there's nothing else out there. Maybe somebody needs to begin to track this. And so that's how Foreclosurepedia.org was born. It was a very small site back then. I probably got 3 or 4 visits, every 3 months maybe. And but people started reaching out to me, and as those contractors started reaching out to me, and they were mentioning back then I didn't know too much about the larger nationals or anything. We worked with brokers, and we worked with A to Z Field Services. We actually started with an outfit before them, and they were called Pyramid. And Pyramid used to hold the HUD contract out here, and so we migrated into A to Z. And but I'm talking with these contractors, and they're bringing up companies like Safeguard, FAS, yada yada. I said, hey, and I want to be very clear here. Not all of these people had pay issues, but so it's just a wide spectrum of issues. And I got to thinking, if all these people, and these are individuals I've never met, have these issues, maybe put a lot of these issues into a one-stop shop. And so I took some of those. I began to write upon that. And I created a wiki identical to Wikipedia and began cataloging information. And so I began to reach out to the industry. And I was very surprised because high-level, C-level individuals started saying, well, yes, when we dealt with technological issues, for example, when A to Z took over HUD's contract, there was some problems about getting some of the forms online, and to me, one of the maxims I learned in construction was that time is money, and so I started cataloging this, speaking with a lot of C-level people, and curiously enough, it was actually the C-level people at some very powerful organizations that started saying, hey, are you familiar with this issue? And have you talked to so-and-so? These were predominantly vendor managers. Some of them were CFOs and COOs. And I said, no. So I began to examine those, and that's when I realized that we were dealing with a very large-scale issue. And in all fairness to the industry, and if you read my site, you'll find that it's chalked to the hilt with rhetoric, and I'm entitled to do that. I fought for my country. It's my First Amendment rights, and I that's my opinion. But with that said, I realized that it's really easy for anybody to go out there and scream there's a problem, but it's very difficult for people to come to the plate and say, here's what we propose as a solution. And so I attempted to do that. I reached out to the United States government, reached out to J.P. Morgan Chase, reached out to Wells Fargo, Bank of America, et cetera, ad nauseum, and I made some pretty good connections. But what I found was that there was gridlock, not dissimilar to in the Beltway, like in Washington, D.C. There was gridlock, and the causation of that gridlock was that there was no regulation. And a prime example of that is, let's take winterization, for example. Albeit you may have training out there, and I believe NAMPS, National Association of Mortgage Field Services, has some training. VRM has some training. I believe you even worked within some training fields, Rob Preston. But here's the deal. It's hard to have, with respect to winterization, nobody can really agree how many minutes do you hold the pressure, what do you hold the pressure on, and is there, say, a differentiation between copper, PVC, and CPVC? And so I reached right back out to the industry, and I said, hey, shouldn't we all come together and, maybe come up with a standardization of this? That way you guys get the best bang for your buck, and then the contractors, have a baseline from what, almost like the Big Mac model. Buy a Big Mac in Tokyo, it's the same thing that it is in New York. And nobody wanted to touch that, and I was curious.
Well, who did you contact?
Well, I ended up reaching out actually to the Mortgage Bankers Association, and because they have an enormous commercial manual that deals with MDUs, which are multiple dwelling units. And I said, hey, you have this great manual here written, and I might be wrong on the date. I want to say it was the late 80s, early 90s. And I'd socially engineered my way on the phone call with the lady, and she said, look, she said, with respect to commercial properties, you're absolutely right. We have these manuals, and this is precisely how you do this. We're not going to touch residential properties. And I said, well, I'm curious why. And she said, because of the liability. She said, what little regulation there is, comes from the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. And so we'll leave the liability firmly there. So I reached back out yet again. I reached out to people at A to Z, Field Services up in Ohio. Towards the end, I'd actually even reached out, to Field Asset Services in Texas, and nobody really wanted to get involved in setting any baselines, and that was a big concern of mine. And so that kind of gives you, in a nutshell, Foreclosurepedia, the website, the blog came into existence because of the fact that I felt, A, there was absolutely no communication going on between contractors in a centralized one-stop shop area, and then B, there was no accountability. It was a one-way street, if you will. And I felt that one-way street originated with the bank to the national who controlled that order, and then thereout it went to the contractors, and it was a dictatorial, if you will, a dictatorship in how things were to be done.
And you think Foreclosurepedia is going to turn that into a Foreclosurepedia.org is going to turn that into a two-way street?
No, I actually don't at all. I have absolutely no I have absolutely no belief that will ever happen. I believe to Foreclosurepedia.org serves as two things. The first thing that it serves as is a check and balance. And what I mean by that is that if you are an order mill, and what I call an order mill is any company that originates work orders and does not perform physical, tangible labors upon those. If you are an order mill and you are not going to play by the rules, i.e. pay your contractors, do such in a timely manner, and within a living wage, then you're going to be held accountable. The second thing that I believe Foreclosurepedia is an intelligence apparatus. And what I mean by that is, and I've gotten into it with lawyers, lawyers with AMS, REO, CWIS, FAS most recently, and I just took on Assurance General Counsel, Jason Rosenberg. And so if you're going to get out there on a limb and you're going to attempt to screw people, for want of a PC term, then I'm going to blow you up on the internet. I'm going to post everything there is about you. Counselor Rosenberg's position was that, well, you can't just put everybody's information out there. And I said, well, Counselor, you go ahead and name Google in that lawsuit as well, because this is public information. Now, I learned that tactic from the intelligence community because everybody, what applies in the United States is actually called the Fourth Amendment, and everybody has a reasonable expectation to privacy of their home, their vehicle, their person, short of maybe a Terry stop. But when people freely, willingly, and with overt intention put information onto the internet, there is no expectation of privacy. And so what I do is I bring all that information to a one-stop shop. Is it legal? Of course. Is it ethical or moral? You know, I quite honestly give no more thought about ethics and morals than I do passing salt at the dinner table. What I realize is that I'm involved in an asymmetrical, protracted war. And that war is against this industry, whom for several decades has felt that it can just push around contractors willy-nilly.
Well, haven't you been told that you're causing a lot of damage? Or, I mean, you just been flat out told that, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've been told that by both the order mills and contractors. And to that point, with respect to contractors, you know, and I made no bones about this. Last year I posted an article. I stated that I predicted approximately a 60 to 80% attrition rate, i.e. the loss of contractors within the industry. And I think we're approaching that bell-shaped curve now. I think we're probably at 40 to 50%. Now, in every conflict that you have collateral damage. And, so I believe some of those contractors that are no longer in this industry are collateral damage. Now, not from me, but when you deal with pricing, volume, things like that. But with that said, I have absolutely no issues whatsoever with the eradication of contractors whom are not contractors and order mills in and of themselves. The reason being is, for example, when I ran Foreclosurepedia, I had to have general liability. I had to have commercial insurance on the vehicles, the trailers. I had to have equipment. I had to pay out my bills in a timely manner, et cetera, ad nauseum. I believe in upwards of 50, and I think that's very conservative. 50%, and probably way more of the contractors today do not belong in this industry. And the way that I like to epitomize these people, these are people who have a death grip on a crack pipe, driving a hatchback Pinto with the electric cord to their lawnmower hanging out of the hatchback. And I'm not joking. That is truly what I think. The remaining, if you will, 50%, I think out of that, 30% need to be gone because they don't know anything about running a business anyway. And that's just being quite honest. I guarantee you go in and look at the P&Ls of any of those 30%, and they're completely in the red. The remaining 20%, I would say maybe 14% of those could transform into legitimate contractors. For far too long, this industry has reached out on Craigslist, and they've known that. They've done this at their own peril. And quite frankly, the vast majority of those individuals running the order mills are members of the NAMFS. That doesn't mean the NAMFS is a bad thing at all. But, you have to identify what's the issue. If you're recruiting through Craigslist, you have an issue.
Well, you say that they've done this at their own peril, but I haven't seen any big names leave.
Well, you haven't. What you've seen is they've actually been bought out. And what you've also seen, I'll give you a big name. Let's talk about Field Asset Services. Now, 5 years ago, Field Asset Services under the leadership of Dale McPherson was all well and good. And really all of them 5 years ago was great because you had all this money that was streaming in on a two-way street. Nobody blinked an eye. But when Dale McPherson, and that is a big name, when he sold up to First Service based out of Canada, and you started tracking the money, you had a valuation back then, maybe 250 plus or minus million. But when you pull the actual numbers from the Ontario Securities Commission out of Canada, you can see First Service took a huge hit. And it wasn't just that, it was the leadership and the belief within that company. Dale had a huge nosedive with specificity to the Wounded Warrior Project and Chase, J.P. Morgan Chase. And, that was a multi-million-dollar boondoggle. And he did that back-to-back with Fannie Mae. So where am I going with that? I'm going with the fact that you have a mentality in this industry that if we are the ones originated in farming out the work orders, we can do anything we want. And in Dale McPherson's case, he sold out, what, 50 million? I mean, let's not bullshit around. Look at the numbers, crunch them. You're going to see just on that 3 to 4 year situation, he took a nosedive. Let's look more on point, let's say, with MCS, Mortgage Contracting Services, or AMS REO. The recent mergers under Concentric Equity Group, with the money being floated by TDR Capital, they don't exist anymore. So I think that my statements are very poignant, and they're very accurate in the fact that the only true national left is Safeguard, and they're pending federal racketeering charges and multi-count indictments from the Illinois Attorney General, with 7 other states lining up to sue. I can't think of another nationals that's out there.
Yeah. Well, listen, let's bring this down several levels, because you mentioned Craigslist. You've mentioned order mills. I've had 2 or 3 conversations with a contractor whose talent, it appears, to be putting jobs together, going out and getting work, overseeing it, and that looks like that's where his talent is. But he also, has spent, several years out, actually doing the work himself, and he's having a heck of a time trying to decide if becoming an order mill, I mean, that's the label that we put on it, is what he should do. He thinks now, because of all the negative talk about order mills, he thinks that will make him a bad guy. And I told him I disagree, because if he has the talent to get work and make sure it's done and put it out, I don't see a problem with that. So expand a little bit about your remarks on order mills. What about this little guy that wants to be an order mill?
Well, order mills 2-3 years ago might have been a well and good thing. With Dodd-Frank legislation already in place, and come Q1 of this coming year in 2014, the CFPB, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, enacting the legislation that was mandated with specificity to the foreclosed properties under Dodd-Frank, I think you're going to see the days of any of the regional and what I call otherwise unspecified order mills done. They're gone. I mean, whether you look across the board at the regionals, and I wrote an article on Heather Berghorst, and I don't have any issues with her. I've never met the lady. But from a fiscal point of view, if you look at all of the regionals, Midwest Metro, Sentinel, et cetera ad nauseum, you can go into Saxon, Wolverine, whoever you want to go into, all their numbers are in the tank. And why are they in the tank? Because of the fact, and then I'll get to the reason why they're going to be gone, regardless if they're healthy on their P&L. They're in the tank because of the fact you had these individuals go out while the money was flowing in largely, and they took on enormous amounts of debt. So right from jump, these aren't business owners. What these are individuals who are capable of going out and getting loans. Now, Berghorst is a little different. Her credit wasn't good enough. She had to go to the taxpayer, went to SBA to get a 504. It was some weird loan if your credit's no good. But with the new regulations coming in, order mills will be a thing of the past. And why is that? In any other form of federal contracting, when a person performs a service, you're allowed to place a maximum of 18.95% administrative fee on that. Government generally allows you to round it up to 20, but it's 18.95 if you pull the FARs and everything else. Remember, it doesn't matter if these are HUD properties. The pre-foreclosure and pre-conveyance, with the exception of conventional loans, and there's not a tremendous amount of those out there, these are all monies that are being pulled back from FHFA or FHA. Additionally, when those bills go out, FHA is billed, as is the homeowner. Many people don't understand that. Homeowner gets a 1099, and that 1099 might be $30,000, it might be $300,000. All those services, everything gets billed out. Within the United States government, you have a law that is called the False Claims Act. So if you have, if for example, Fannie Mae says, okay, Freddie Mac, whoever says, we have an allowable of $125 for the lock, and by the time it's gone through 2 or 3 different order mills and everybody taking 20% off that, excuse me, and the contractor's doing it for, I've seen some locks at $13, some of them $25, some $40, but regardless, you can only add 20% on top of that. It's against the law to do it otherwise, and that's a false claim because you're submitting to the government that it cost you $125 to perform that lock change. And that's bullshit. And rightly so, it's bullshit because at the end of the day, screw the fact of whether or not I'm a contractor or not. What I am is I'm a taxpayer. I'm a taxpayer, and that money's being lent out interest-free, and it's not going to happen anymore. And that's why Dodd-Frank, you're going to see a huge change this coming year. So with specificity to your friend, would I recommend that he gets involved in order milling? Absolutely not. What I would recommend he gets involved in is rehabs. Rehabs is where it's at.
Well, it sounds like you got a pretty good handle on this, but it seems like the scenario that you're describing to me is the absolute end of the industry, because if you get rid of the order mills, how is the work going to flow from HUD or the banks to the field?
Well, I didn't say get rid of them all. For example, and you'll find this very strange, let's take Safeguard Properties, for example. I don't dislike personally Amir Jaff or Robert Klein. Yeah, I've never met them. I don't have an axe to grind with them. Here's the reality. They're a national. At some point in time, they invested a tremendous amount of money in their infrastructure. Now, with Safeguard Properties, that's probably not a good example because their technological infrastructure is for shit. They're still running on DOS 3.0. When they bought out bought out Bank of America Field Services, the biggest problem that they had was the fact that Bank of America could transmit no data to them. When they brought the employees over and trained them up at Valley View, and I reported on this, they had to buy them all brand new laptops. But with that said, you're going to have national order mills, and national order mills are completely legal. When you get into the fact, and national means a top tier, that means whether it's HUD, and HUD hires what's known as a prime vendor. So on the pre-conveyance side, we would call Safeguard perhaps a prime vendor. Maybe that's a more PC term. I like order mill. And I like order mill because it connotates just like a pill mill or a puppy mill or a baby mill. And I look at these people no differently. Yeah, just how I am. But you have to have people like Safeguard. You have to have people like the Concentric Equity Group. Now, I predict here now on your show tonight that by Q3 of next year, the only nationals that'll be out there will be under the roofs and under the umbrellas of publicly traded firms. I predict that because that's the only way that the banks can force compliance with Dodd-Frank. The banks own these homes now. They paid their $26 billion. J.P. Morgan just shot out another 5.1. Bank of America, I predict at 8.1, 8.7 billion. So they want to move these homes from A to B, and they have to. And this is what contractors don't understand. This is a deeper subject, but it deals with order mills. What we have here is a situation. Ben Bernanke, chairman of the Fed, is leaving us. Now, what he brought us was this great cluster F, because I don't know if we're live. I don't know if I can use profanity, but this great cluster F called quantitative easing. This was 0% money that was lent out. You print it, it doesn't matter. And they coupled that with buying $100 billion, if you count their offshore subsidiaries, of toxic assets. He's leaving, and we're bringing in, Janet Yellen. And Yellen's a very, very fiscally conservative lady. She's probably blue-collar in nature because that's how she was raised, back east. And so we're going to start to see the interest rates track up. Now, the banks categorically know that when interest tracks up, two things happen. The first thing happens is that you start marching towards hyperinflationism. The second thing that's more on point that the contractors will understand is that people stop buying homes. People stop buying homes. And if they stop buying homes and your institutional buyers are gone, then what do you have? You have this enormous portfolio that's laying around. So what do? You convert it from REO to rental. What do I mean by that? You rehab the house, you put it over into rental, you make sure that it's eligible for a Section 8 purchase. That way you can draw what's called derivative bonds against your portfolio. You can't do that with regular rentals or tangible property that's just laying around.
Well, there is a lot of talk about REO to rental. I mean, you see more and more of it every day. But, Paul, I can't see how, let's say that you're 100% correct, that all of your predictions come true. I don't see how it could happen by the third quarter of next year. I mean, this is a huge endeavor. I don't see it.
You only have one national left. And I think by Q3 of this coming year, the only question that will be remaining is how much, if any, time Mr. Jaffa and Mr. Klein do. I mean, when you look at the holistic case that's pending against them, this is filed in the United States District Court for the Western District of Pennsylvania. The general counsel, the lead counsel who filed that He's been practicing law about 42 years. You can't hire him. He only takes cases that he wants. He is the one who wrote the 1,014-page foreclosure treatise. He also works with individuals over at Indiana University whom penned the RICO Act statute. So let's make sure we all understand what federal racketeering is. Federal racketeering is RICO. Now, at the same point in time, they have the Illinois Attorney General's suit that's churning around. Now, they're going to settle that, and that's the civil, and as is the RICO matter over in Pennsylvania. I want to be clear on that. However, the question that's going to posit is when the United States government smells blood, are they going to get in there and toss around some criminal conviction or criminal charges? I believe they will. I believe they will, because I've reached out to both general counsels on the case. The Illinois Attorney General's office I've spoken with, as with the Holista matter. So what we have is safeguard for all intents and purposes. I haven't been wrong in my predictions yet. I'm not wrong now. I'm much like the Oracle from Omaha. And, I don't blush when I say that. What I do it good. And so what I'm driving at is that you are going to see a tremendous move Q1, early to mid Q1, of a lot of the regionals to sell out. And they're going to sell out in merger acquisitions. And you're going to see Concentric and you're going to see Assurant make a lot of those purchases. Why? Not because of the fact that those people can do anything, because they really can't. I mean, they're not really doing shit other than moving a couple of orders around. The reason being is those databases of the contractor information. That's what's important. For example, if you look at the purchase of LPS by Fidelity National, they used to be in bed together anyway, but LPS, everybody thinks about property preservation. And they don't even really do a good job at preservation. What they do a damn good job at is software. If you go down to Fort Lauderdale and throughout mid-Florida, their software is right now powering the Juvenile Justice Center down there. That's why they're bought. So you're going to see the movement of the regionals being consolidated by the publicly traded firms. I predict no later than Q4. Mid Q4 of next year, the landscape that everybody's seeing today is gone. G-O-N-E gone.
Well, how's the average contractor out in the field going to get his work?
They will get that from from one of the publicly traded firms, whether it be Concentric, which is AMS, REO, MCS, or whether it be from Assurant.
So they're going to become an order mill. They're just going to be publicly traded.
Well, that's precisely what they are now. For example, I mean, you look at the Concentric Equity Group. All they did was buy MCS, AMS, REO, and the very interesting part of that portfolio was VPS. VPS is on the maintenance side. You see, contractors today are so stuck. I mean, they're stuck to use, I think it was U.S. Cellular or something like that. That's so 17 minutes ago. That's where contractors are today. They don't realize that where the money is in the movement of that asset from A to B and then the maintaining of that asset. Because the reality, let's look at our volumes. Let's not bullshit around and let's set shadow inventory to the side, because there's a lot of arguments on that. But what do we have? 680,000 plus or minus? And, that's from a, that's from a high of, 3 million. And you have to look, you're dividing that amongst 50 states. So this concept that if we continue to bow down and keep our mouths shut and continue to take less and less pay, hey, that's great. You know what? If it works for you, great. But don't contact Foreclosurepedia when you don't get paid. Because the reality is if you're having to get paid less, then the mill above you is having to take less. So, I mean, it's business.
Well, listen, Paul, you've agreed to be a co-host this Tuesday on QC Talk, so we can hold a lot of that for then. But make a note, I do want to concentrate a little bit on your consulting services and what you think that you can do for the contractors. I think I think that the guys and the gals out in the field, they need to know what you can do. And as I told you earlier before we went on the air, I don't think anybody really knows who you are. They just read your stuff at Foreclosure, and they just assume that you're just a easygoing, laid back guy, and
Truth be known, I live out here. I live in a county with one stoplight, and literally, I mean, the best way to give the example of where I live is those of you out here listening tonight, if you remember Burt Reynolds, he had a movie called Deliverance. And, that's truly where I live. I mean, it's a very rural, very remote area, and I love it. But, I'm converting a barn to a house. I'm a prepper. I'm a very ardent prepper. I believe that any individual whom believes that their government is going to come in and save the day if the power goes out or there's a huge natural disaster has lost their mind, and the best thing they can do probably is, maybe go up and start reading Obama talking points up in Lafayette Park. But
that's another thing you and I have in common.
Yeah, and that's not so. We're not talking the militia here. What we're talking about is self-sufficiency, the very foundation and core and principles of what put the United States together. With respect to consulting, and this has been a big deal for me. There's always going to be property preservation, and there are always going to be contractors in preservation. At what levels, that's arguable. But I've always believed that the men and women whom are in the industry right now, they all have innate skill sets, whether it's cutting the lawn, the ability to clean, the ability to logistically move a product from point A to point B. And all of those are in those skill sets are in very high demand within federal contracting, whether you're talking about SAM or GSA. And big example I use, for example, is we have a veteran cemetery over here in Memphis. Every year they can't land a contract, and they'll pay $1 million to do it. So that's why I finally broke camp, and I said, hey, forget this. I'm getting in federal contracting. I got to go start paying my cell phone bill, And,
yeah. Well, do you do any 203 K stuff? I know that you do the SAR and the Dun and Bradstreet. I know you help contractors all that. Have you looked into the 203 stuff?
Yeah, we actually physically do 203, and that's what's called a rehab note. We actually do 203K work on our rehab side. I do it myself, so I only do a couple of them a month. Now, where I'm at out here, everything, all the notes are USDA. Most people think of notes like FHA or whatever. And for anybody listening out there tonight, that's something you want to research. USDA has a huge portfolio. But what I like to do is I like to help contractors get out of the industry and get into federal contracting. And the reality is that we're talking $1.7 trillion plus or minus every year. Every year is being farmed out. 32% of all United States government contracting must go, not maybe, must go to very small businesses. And unlike HUD being the only and the most corrupt form of federal contracting, not just in the United States but on Earth, the rest of these agencies, they don't play with it. They don't care. Why? Because everybody understands you go out, you do your work, you get paid, and everybody's happy. Another big aspect is like the BRAC. That's the Base Realignment Commission. We have all these military bases that are shut down all over the United States. Excuse me, and those lawns the grass has to be cut. You look at FEMA. Simple SAM account, can get you registered for those FEMA disasters. Insane money. And, go ahead.
Well, do you think that you can gear up for that and field calls from contractors by this Tuesday?
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I wanted to add one thing before I got off the line with you. I think there's this enormous perception out there, excuse me, that Paul Williams wants the entire industry, scorched earth policy, and that I especially have access to grind with people in particular. There's been a lot of scuttlebutt that because of what I write, I may dislike Eric Miller, or I didn't like, Deanna Alfredo, folks like that. And to understand me and to understand my writing, you have to understand my premise. There's a differentiation between business and personal. Eric Miller is one of the most fine and upstanding gentlemen I ever actually have spoken with in the industry. He gave me about an hour of his time. I want to say is maybe a year and a half ago, maybe a year ago, so don't quote me on that timeline. Very articulate, knew his product. And so what I'm driving at is because two people publicly do not get along, should never be taken by individuals to think that there is animosity there. Mr. Miller was always very, pleasant and forthright with me. Same thing goes for Craig Carnes. Craig Carnes, the director of the marketing and maintenance contract, is the HUD contract down there in Atlanta, Georgia, controls all of HUD. While I have issues with him publicly, i.e. the policy and the protocols, and the same with Eric Miller, as an individual, Craig Carnes, great individual. And so I think oftentimes whenever everybody gets hopped up in this 24/7 social media world, people like to read into things. And so I just want to take this time to say, with respect to those two individuals, those are very fine, upstanding individuals. My job, though, as a journalist, and the legal counsel of U.S. Best Repairs has now quoted me, has cited that I am a media outlet in public now. But my job is to present advocacy journalism. There's a difference between that and NBC. NBC is supposedly supposed to be unbiased, although we all know they aren't. But I am definitely biased. And I am biased because I believe that by any means necessary, I need to secure a level playing field for those contractors whom are going to stay in this industry, and best assist in the exodus of those contractors who realize, hey, you know what? I want to go work in, other aspects of federal contracting.
Yeah. You got the right to do all of the above. I will be contacting, Eric and, a few other people. I'd like to get as many people as I can on here, and we just talk things through. Okay, Paul, let me shut this down, and hold on a minute. I'll be right back with you. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.